People say that money makes the world go round. And on this podcast, you'll learn how to talk about money and how to negotiate price in English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with nearly 50 years of teaching English between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take everything, your grammar, your vocabulary, your pronunciation, up to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm feeling fine, Craig. I'm feeling good because spring is in the air here in Valencia. We're used to good weather most of the time, but for the last couple of weeks, it's been terrible, hasn't it?
I know, and last week I went to Mallorca, to Alcudia on the north of the island, northeast of the island, with some friends from the UK, and 7 of my friends flew over from beautiful sunny weather in the UK, and they arrived in Mallorca, and it was raining. And it was really bad weather for about 3 days. But it didn't matter because we enjoyed each other's company and we just enjoyed being together. So it didn't spoil the holiday. But it's really strange, isn't it, to have such nice weather in the UK and not very nice weather here.
Yeah, we're so spoiled here. Whenever we have to put up with, to tolerate rain for a week, we can't believe it here in Valencia. Whereas it's a daily occurrence in the UK.
Yeah, I think we are definitely spoiled. Well, on today's podcast, we are going to be speaking about money vocabulary, how to negotiate price and speak about price in English. But before that, we've got some feedback on a recent podcast that we released about urban myths and legends. That was podcast 408. So if you want to listen, go back to inglespodcast.com/408 and have a listen to that podcast. Reza, can you read an email that we received from Carlos who comments on that episode?
Carlos writes, "In Venezuela, we have myths and mysteries from the 19th century. La Sayona, a crying female ghost that appears on dark nights. It's called Pacheco, and it's named after the cold fog that appears in the first days of December only in Caracas City. In January, it disappears. It's a story that my grandmother told me when I was a child."
I wonder if it was a scary story. I mean, what do you think about children being told scary stories with ghosts appearing on dark nights and something bad's going to happen to you if you don't eat your dinner?
Well, I actually did a little bit of internet research because I was very interested in what Carlos said. And Carlos, you probably know that in a few other Latin American countries, they have a very similar story. Maybe they call the character something different, but the idea of this female ghost who appears on dark nights, and quite often she comes in variations from other countries to punish unfaithful men.
Okay, interesting, and rightly so.
Yep, and in some version, she wails, she cries, laments, and they draw a comparison in some websites that I read with Irish banshees that we mentioned.
Of course, we mentioned banshees in that episode, in episode 408, yeah.
So this is like the Latina banshee.
Next, we have a message from Gemma from Madrid, who comments on the same podcast episode 408, about urban myths and legends. And Gemma says, "When I was a little kid, it was talked about el hombre del saco. Gemma, is probably better to say I was told about, not I was told about, or people talked about. So take it back to that past tense. El hombre del saco. And when I got a little older, de la mujer de la curva, who was supposed to appear on the curve of a road in the dark like a ghost. Let's quickly translate those for any non Spanish-speaking listeners. El hombre del saco, what's that? The man of the sack?
The man of the sack or the man of the bag or something like that.
The bag man?
Yeah.
And la mujer de la curva, the woman of the curve. Now, the curve in the road. So obviously some kind of ghost or spirit that waited for... A bit like the hairy hands that we spoke about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
In Dartmoor in England. Very similar. Well, thank you for your feedback on that episode. It seems like you enjoyed it. So if you haven't listened, that's inglespodcast.com/408. Urban myths and legends. But what's today, Reza? What's the topic for this podcast?
I'm going to leave the supernatural behind now and get down to the main business of the day, which is perhaps the most important thing for some people on earth. Money, 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 money. Money and negotiating price. That's what we're going to talk about today.
Well, first of all, let's look at some basic expressions. Obviously, if you want to know the price of something, your questions in English will be something like, how much is it? Probably in a shop, you'd be more polite. So, excuse me, how much is it? Remember that up and down intonation to make your questions sound more polite. How much is it, please? Or, how much does it cost? Excuse me, how much does this cost? Or how much does it cost? Can you think of any more, Reza?
I can think of more informal, more colloquial ways. You could say, what's the damage? Now, the word damage usually refers to physical or psychological harm. But this is a special expression to ask for the price of something because you suppose, jokingly, that when you hear the price, you're not going to like it. It's going to cause you harm. So you say, what's the damage? Or perhaps, how much will it set me back? If something sets you back, it's an inconvenience. So yeah, to pay any bill is always an inconvenience, isn't it? So we say, how much will it set me back?
Now let's classify some expressions into the cheaper prices and the more expensive prices. So when you're paying little for something and when you're paying a little more for something. So looking first at the cheap side of things or inexpensive. Now there is a slight difference between cheap and inexpensive. Inexpensive simply means it is not expensive. However, cheap can have an implication, a suggestion of lower quality. I remember once when my dad's friend had a clothes shop and I went inside and asked the price of a jacket and he told me the price. I don't remember what it was. I said, oh, that's cheap. He said, no, Craig, it's very good quality. That is inexpensive. We don't use the word cheap in this shop. So just try and remember that if you're using the word cheap, it could in some situations mean bad quality, whereas inexpensive means not expensive.
Another thing you could say is that it's a good price or it's a fair price. In other words, what you have to pay is reasonable for what you get. It's definitely not expensive. It's a good price or it's a fair price.
Similar expressions to that, it's a real bargain or it's a good deal. If you're happy with the price, then it's reasonable, it's a good deal, it's a bargain. Now, this could also used to answer a question. If somebody asks you the price of something and you say the price, you could see, oh, that's a fair price or that's a good price. You could use that as a reply to somebody telling you how much they've paid for something, and that makes the person feel good. How much was your new laptop computer? It was 600 euros. That's a very fair price. That's a good price. That's a real bargain. Well done.
You could be specific about how cheap something is if, for example, it's in the sales. Las rebajas, the sales. For example, it could be 40% off. So the normal price is £100, but they're charging £60, so it's 40% off. Which doesn't necessarily mean something's cheap, of course, because if they were charging too much to begin with, maybe now it's just a reasonable price. You got to watch out for that in the sales, don't you?
Yeah, they can be dishonest, can't they? But if something does appear very, very, very cheap, you could say it's dirt cheap. D-I-R-T. That means very cheap, because dirt is something you would find on the ground, in the fields, or in my case, in my flat, if you don't clean for a long time, you get dirty floors, you get dirty furniture. So dirt is free, it's cheap. And if something is dirt cheap, using dirt as an adjective, it's very, very cheap. Have you heard the expression cheap as chips?
I've heard that. That's a more modern version, isn't it?
Because potatoes are obviously very cheap. So if you make chips, they're very cheap. So it's as cheap as chips. It's really, really cheap.
I would say that one, though, is very particular to the UK.
Yes.
You won't hear that one in America or anywhere else.
No, because, of course, in America, chips are crisps, potato chips.
Another similar one to the idea of like it's as cheap as dirt, in other words, virtually nothing, is to say it's a giveaway. Because normally to give something away means you donate it, that you don't charge any money for it. So if something is cheap, but not actually free, but cheap, you can say, wow, it's a giveaway. It's almost as if it were free.
And that's giveaway as one word, not a phrasal verb. You could also say it's a steal, which is very similar in meaning to a giveaway. So if something is a steal, that does not mean you literally steal it. That just means the price is so low that you almost did steal it because it's a ridiculously cheap price to pay. So how much did you pay for your laptop? Oh, 50 euros. Well, it's a steal. It's ridiculously cheap. It's nothing. Very, very cheap.
Now, the next one we've got, I've always found curious because it isn't logical at all if you think about it. People say, oh, cheap at half the price. Cheap at half the price. And that means very reasonably priced. But if you think about it, it's obvious. Yeah, if something's half the price, it's better than the full price. I mean, of course. But for some reason, which defies logic in English, to say that something is very reasonably priced, we say, oh, cheap at half the price. Don't ask me why. It's not logical, but that's what we say. Because, of course, half price is cheaper than full price. So there's no logic to it, but we say it.
It seems like it should be cheap at twice the price.
Yeah, but that's not what we say.
Yeah.
We say cheap at half the price. I've checked and double checked, and yeah, a lot of people in forums comment, yeah, not logical, but that's what we say.
I read somewhere that maybe it came originally from barrow boys. They're the usually young men who wheel the food and the fruit around in markets, in food markets, and they shout to the customers to sell the food. So maybe that's where it came from, selling things in markets. If you're very happy with something you have bought, in other words, the quality and the price is correct in your opinion, it's a good ratio between the quality and what you pay, you can say it's good value for money. That's a very common expression in English. Yes, it's good value for money. This restaurant, it's really, really nice. It's not very expensive. It's just good value for money. You get good food at a fair price. Good value for money.
In other words, you could say it's all right for what you pay, or not bad for what you pay. You're not saying you find it cheap, but considering what they give you, the quality, you're happy enough to pay that. You're not ecstatic. It's not a steal, but it's not bad for what you pay.
So those are some expressions that speak more about inexpensive shopping or purchases. Let's move now to expensive expressions. Now, if you buy that laptop I mentioned earlier, but you paid 4,000 euros for it, you could say it cost a fortune. It cost a lot of money. Now, I'm sure you've bought a very good quality laptop, but it cost a lot of money. It cost a fortune, and that's often used when there's a feeling of something being overpriced. Do you agree, Reza?
Yeah.
There's a tendency to use this expression when you pay maybe a bit more than you should have.
And by the way, be careful with the word cost. Craig said it cost a fortune. He didn't say it costs with an S. He said it cost because remember, cost is irregular. So the infinitive is to cost and the past is cost. So if you say it cost, that's third person. So it's got to be the past. If I were saying it in the present, I would say this costs a lot of money. This costs with an S. So be careful with the verb cost. An equally dramatic expression is, it was a rip-off. So if somebody rips you off, the phrasal verb to rip off, they've tricked you, they've deceived you, they've made you pay far more money than you should have. They've done something dishonest. So if something's very expensive, you can say it was a rip-off. Craig, what about the last time you were ripped off? Can you remember exactly when it happened?
Not so long ago, I felt ripped off in an airport recently. I paid €3.80 for a cup of coffee with milk, un café con leche, and it was at Mallorca Airport. But I don't think that's unusual because I often feel ripped off when I go to airports, and you pay €2.50, maybe €3 for a bottle of water. You pay €10 or more for a small sandwich. So I think airports do rip people off. They do put the prices so high just because there is nowhere else, no other place you can buy food or drink.
I think your example is very good, particularly about the water with rip-off, because rip-off often has the idea of like you've been deceived or you were caught in some way. You couldn't escape. You had no choice but to fall for the trap. And let's be honest, listeners, everybody knows what happens. We all know what happens. You're not allowed to bring your own water past the customs.
For security reasons.
Security reasons. Surprise, surprise. It costs a fortune when you get there. No surprise. They know what they're doing. It's a rip-off.
And very often there's no free water tap so that you can refill your water bottle, and you have to buy bottled water. There's no choice if you want to stay hydrated.
And everybody knows water. If there's one thing you want to make sure you've got, it's water. So they know you're going to buy it.
So I think we both agree that water in airports costs an arm and a leg. So here's an idiom, an arm and a leg. If something costs an arm and a leg, that doesn't mean you literally have to cut off an arm and cut off your leg. It just means that it's so expensive that you almost have to give some of your body to pay for it. So it cost me an arm and a leg when I went traveling last week. Or I'm very happy with my laptop computer. It's fantastic, but it did cost an arm and a leg. It was very expensive.
Now, if you want to say that something's too expensive, but you want to kind of understate, that means you don't want to be too dramatic about it, but you want to make it clear that you think it's expensive. You could say, it's a bit pricey, or it's a bit steep. And by adding the adverb a bit, so you're saying, okay, I'm not saying it's incredibly pricey. I'm saying a bit. But actually, often we use it when really we do mean it's very expensive. But particularly in British English, we kind of like to understate things. How much is this Coca-Cola in the airport? €7. Oof, it's a bit steep, isn't it? What we're really saying is very steep. It's very expensive. But perhaps we don't like to say that. So we say a bit pricey, a bit steep.
The word steep may be new for some listeners. S-T-E-E-P. That's the gradient of a slope, the angle that goes up. For example, if the hill or road is steep, then the angle that you're going up is very, very wide. So it's difficult to climb the hill or walk up the road. And in a similar way with prices, if prices are too high, then yeah, they're steep.
Another thing you could say is that you pay through the nose for something. There comes the body parts back in again. We had costing an arm and a leg, and now if you pay through the nose, that means it's very expensive.
Imagine pushing coins and money through your nose. That would be painful, wouldn't it?
It would hurt, wouldn't it? Yeah.
The next expression has often confused me because the expression is you need deep pockets to pay for it. So if you have deep pockets, then your pockets are very big, they're very long. You can put your hand in your pocket and you don't reach the bottom. Deep is the opposite of shallow. So if you say that someone has got deep pockets, I can never remember if that's someone who's very generous or very tight and mean with money.
No, generous.
Generous.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're very generous to have deep pockets. It's not that you can't reach the money at the bottom of your deep pocket.
No.
It's the opposite.
If you've got deep pockets, it's the idea of because you've got a lot of money to put in there.
Okay, so you need large pockets. That makes sense.
For the money. So if something needs deep pockets, it's like you're going to need a lot of money to pay for it. You're going to need those big pockets to hold the money in. Of course, these days, you're going to use a credit card probably, aren't you? But originally, it did make sense.
Maybe that will change in the future and you'll say he's got a large credit card. It's the same size as everybody else's, but he's got more money inside it. If you have enough money to pay for something, then you can say that you can afford it. That verb to afford something. AFFORD. I can afford to go on holiday this year. I can afford to buy a new laptop. The opposite, of course, is I can't afford it. And that's also a very common expression. I'm sorry, I can't meet you for lunch. It's a difficult month. I don't have the money. It's an expensive restaurant. I just can't afford it. I don't have the money to pay for it.
There's a couple of other ways you could express not having enough money for something. You could say, it's outside my budget. So a budget is how much money you've got available. It could be for a specific thing. For example, imagine I have a budget of 100 euros for my social life. Yeah, and I've got a budget for paying the electricity bills, and I've got a budget for other things. And I've already spent my 90 of 100 euros. And Craig's invited me to the expensive restaurant, and I say, it's outside my budget. You know, I can't pay any more money. I haven't got enough, or the money that I allocate to this will not be enough.
Another way of saying the same thing, a similar way of saying the same thing, is it's too rich for my blood. It's too rich for my blood. I'm poor. I don't have this kind of high budget. I can't afford it. So if you ask someone for the price of something and it's too expensive, a good way to reply is not to say, oh no, come on man, that's much too expensive. Just say, I'm sorry, that's too rich for my blood. Or it's out of my price range. Your price range is your budget, in Spanish, presupuesto. It's the money you've allocated or given to do something. And if it's out of or beyond that price range, obviously it's too expensive. Remember, you can read all of these expressions and vocabulary on the webpage. Go to inglespodcast.com/411 and you'll see a list of all these words. So, too rich for my blood, and it's out of my price range or beyond my price range.
Now, Craig, we've spoken about how to say things are cheap or expensive, but what about to actually negotiate the price? Because the price might be flexible. Can you think of any good verbs or expressions for that?
Well, let's speak about other ways of saying negotiating price, because that is a fairly business word, isn't it? When you're in a business meeting, or if it's a political discussion, if there's a war happening, then you often have negotiations between two companies or two governments or two sides or more than two sides. So that's negotiating. But a more market-centric word, a word that you might use when you go to an open market or if you go to a country where it's common to argue and discuss the price, you could use the verbs to haggle or to barter. So haggle, H-A-G-G-L-E, or barter, B-A-R-T-E-R, both of those words really mean negotiate. So you're discussing the price. You're making different offers on the price.
Another way to say it is to bargain, bargain. And there's a very common expression which uses the word bargain, but as a noun, to drive a hard bargain. If you drive a hard bargain, that means you're a good negotiator. You tend to get a lot of concessions from other people. It could be as regards money, or it could be a metaphor for anything, in fact, to drive a hard bargain.
If you agree with the person you're haggling with, bartering with, or negotiating with, and you shake hands because everybody is in agreement, you can say that you have cut a deal with the person or with the team, or struck a deal. Those two verbs are, of course, irregular. So cut, that's very easy, doesn't change. But strike is the infinitive, to strike a deal, and the past tense, struck a deal. We have struck a good deal. Well done.
If you want to ask for money off or to get money off, you can also say what you're doing is you're asking for a discount. So a slightly more informal way is with the phrasal verb to get money off, or a way which sounds more like Spanish, doesn't it? Descuento, to ask for a discount, to get money off. A thing you might say to a shopkeeper or perhaps a business person if you're negotiating is it negotiable? So a price has been mentioned, but you're hoping that it's not the final price. So you simply ask straight up, directly, is it negotiable? Or in a slightly more indirect way, can you come down? Now, it doesn't mean get off your seat or get out of this.
You're not upstairs.
You're not upstairs, not physically. In other words, can you bring the price down? Can you come down? Or simply, are you flexible on price? Yeah. If it's obvious, you don't even need to say the words on price. You could just say, 500 euros. Are you flexible?
Yes, I can touch my toes. One negotiating tactic is to meet in the middle or split the difference. For example, if Reza, I want to sell you this pen for 100 euros, what would you offer me?
I might give you 50.
Oh, no, 50, that's a bit too low. I can't accept 50. I'll tell you what, let's meet in the middle. How about 75?
Okay.
Let's split the difference.
Done.
That's a good deal. So you're splitting the difference, meeting in the middle, and everybody is happy. It's a win-win situation. So let's move on to look at some expressions that deal with being mean, being tight with money, not wanting to spend your hard-earned cash.
Let's start off with some nouns. So these are very useful ways to describe a person. A person can be many things. They can be a saint, they can be an angel, they can be a hero, or they can be a skinflint, for example. You don't want people to think you're a skinflint. S-K-I-N, skin, what covers your body? Flint, F-L-I-N-T, altogether. If you're a skinflint, you're tight, you're mean, you do not like to spend money.
A similar word is miser, M-I-S-E-R. If you've seen the film Oliver Twist or read the book, you'll know that Fagin was a miser. He collected coins and silver and gold, and he hid them in a place in his room. So a miser is really, really overly careful and a bit of a skinflint and doesn't like spending money.
If you're a penny pincher, well, maybe you actually pinch pennies. To pinch means to steal. So if you're a penny pincher, you're on the lookout for ways of keeping or avoiding paying even a penny, which is very, very little money. But I guess if you save up a lot of pennies, then you'll eventually have a lot of money. So that means you're a penny pincher.
A similar word is a spendthrift. Another noun, a spendthrift, does not like spending money and is very, very careful with money. So spendthrift. spendthrift. I remember my dad used to drive from where he lived to another town that was 40 or 50 kilometers to save money on toilet paper. But he spent more money on petrol. And I never understood why. He was a spendthrift with some things. He was a very generous man, normally with many things in life, but he would drive miles to save 9 pence or 10 cents on something. So a bit of a spendthrift.
But would you go so far as to say he was a Scrooge?
No, because a Scrooge is very miserly with everything, right? They don't spend money on anything, so they would never take you out for lunch, for example, or buy you a present.
Yeah, that's really, really insulting if you consider someone a Scrooge. Craig mentioned earlier Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens, and Scrooge is another Dickens character. So we got 2 characters from Dickens literature which appear in today's episode. So Scrooge was the name of a person, Ebenezer Scrooge.
Christmas Carol, was it?
Christmas Carol. And that's the first mention of the word, but it's such a popular book that that word, which was the name of a man, has got into the English language to mean a miserable, tight-fisted person.
Yeah, but be careful where you use it, because it could be insulting if you haven't got a good relationship. If you go out with somebody for the first time and they refuse to buy you a drink and you called them a Scrooge, that wouldn't go down. That wouldn't be accepted very well if you didn't have someone with a good sense of humour or a close relationship. So we said that the name of this section was being mean and being tight with money. So mean has 2 meanings. It means, there's one meaning, it means somebody who does not like spending money. So they are very tight with money. You can say it's a mean person. Actually, it has another meaning. A mean person is not a very nice person, a very vindictive, horrible person that does bad things to other people. It's a multiple meaning word, mean. And another similar word, tight-fisted. Imagine you have money in your hand. You close your hand, you make a fist, it's very tight, that money is going nowhere. That money is tightly held in your fist. So the adjective tight-fisted, you don't let go of your money, you keep it in your hand.
Another way of saying the same thing is stingy, S-T-I-N-G-Y. Not stingy. Yeah, something could be stingy. It stings you, like makes you go, ow, it hurts you, it punctures your skin. But no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about stingy. You don't like spending money.
Earlier we spoke about miser, the noun, a miser, a person who doesn't like spending money, and a penny pincher, a person who does not like spending money. Well, those 2 words can also be adjectives. Miserly. That was a miserly thing to do, to not agree to divide the bill. That was a penny-pinching thing you did yesterday.
And we got one more adjectival expression, tighter than a duck's arse. Now, an arse is a colloquial way of saying a bottom. So I imagine ducks, which are not very big creatures, have tight, not very open, not very big bottoms. So if someone is tighter than a duck's arse, they're very, very, very tight. With money, we mean. So there's no way they're ever going to spend anything they don't have to.
But again, be very careful with that expression. You need to have a good relationship with someone to use that in English. Because if I said, oh, Reza, you're tighter than a duck's arse, he'd probably laugh because we have a good relationship. But if I met him for the first time, I would not use that expression. So a nicer way to say it about somebody would be, oh, he's very careful with money. He's very conscientious about how he spends his money. He's very careful.
Craig, how do you feel about haggling over price? Have you done it? Would you do it?
Yeah, it depends where I am. I don't feel comfortable in a country like Spain. I don't feel comfortable in the UK. But I've been to countries where haggling is a very accepted part of the culture. So in that situation, in a market, in a shop, if I know that it is culturally acceptable to argue, negotiate, haggle over the price, I'm fine with it. So for me, it's like a game. You say how much you think it's worth. They tell you a ridiculously high price, and hopefully you can compromise, meet in the middle, split the difference, and everybody's happy. What about you?
Yeah, the same as you. I would be prepared to do it, and I have done it a little bit in countries where it seemed that it was quite accepted to do it. But I wouldn't really do it in Europe and certain other places where it's not customary.
Have you bought anything new recently?
A pair of shoes that I thought was a good deal because I got them in an outlet shop, so I was happy enough with the price.
Did you get any money off?
Yes, there was a 20% discount just that weekend, so I was lucky.
So it was a fair price.
Fair price. What about you? Have you bought anything recently?
I have. Actually, I bought something rather expensive on your recommendation. This week I bought a new mattress for my bed because my old mattress was about 15 years old, maybe 20 years old, very, very old and not very comfortable. So I bought a very nice mattress that Reza recommended, and it's a bit pricey. It's a bit steep, but I like paying for quality, and I think it's really important to sleep on a good mattress so that you don't hurt your back. And I did get 30% off the price, so I was happy with the final price.
Yeah, this mattress, which I recommended for Craig, I did warn him it was going to be expensive, but still it's good value for money. Something can be expensive, but still be good value for money if you get a lot of quality for what you pay. Would you agree it's good value for money?
Absolutely. And I think Reza and I both agree that if there are two things you should probably spend a lot of money on, one is a good mattress, the other one is your shoes. Because if you're not in one, you're in the other, and you need to be comfortable.
I always end up paying quite a lot of money in shoes, but I never complain because for me, the quality is so important. Whereas I always try to get money off clothes because I don't really care about them. Yeah, always.
So have you bought anything that you paid money for recently? How do you feel about it? Do you feel that you had good value for money? Are you happy with the price that you paid? We would love to hear about your recent purchases, and that is a way that you can practice this vocabulary and improve your English. If you want to comment on this episode, you can get in touch by voice message. Go to speakpipe.com, that's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast.
If you want to write to us, you can write to Craig at inglespodcast.com or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you're interested in paying for an online course, go to store.mansioningles.net, and there you will see a wide selection of paid courses that will help you with your English. Before we go, we'd like to thank all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. And you can join them. You can join our Patreon scheme for as little as $1.20 per month. That's including the VAT, the value-added tax. And by doing this, you get instant access to recent transcriptions. Recently, people have been asking about the free job interview ebook. If you go to the beginning of the Patreon posts, you will see that download. It is free. Once you've joined, you can download that to your computer. And to sign up for Patreon, go to patreon.com/Ingles podcast. Who has joined us this month, Reza?
Yes, we always thank all our Patreon sponsors, but we don't have enough time to mention all the names. But we traditionally mention the most recent sponsors who've just joined us, and they are Juan Cabrerizo, Greta Fernandez, Juan Pablo Guerramarin, Christian Colorado Ulvarela, Alberto Velasco Niña, Walter Jesus Contreras Hermosilla, Norman Foster, the name of a very famous person, Jürgen Olsen, and Francisca. And don't worry, you'll never have to haggle with us because these podcasts are free. And if you want to donate money to the Patreon scheme, it's totally voluntary. And it's up to you how much you pay. So no haggling for inglespodcast.com.
It sounds like good value for money to me. And we'd like to thank all of you who are supporting us through Patreon. What's next week, Reza?
Next week, we'll be talking about crime idioms and expressions.
Okay, we don't go stealing any of my money. We'll speak about crime next week. Until next time, thank you so much for listening this week. It's goodbye from me.
and it's goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pids. The track is called See You Later.